Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside DevOps. I'm your host, John Bristowe, and joining me today is John-Daniel Trask. JD, I guess, I assume, is
hmm
what folks will call you. It's like that old joke, like my friends call me JD. You may call me Mr. Trask. Um, JD, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're the founder and CEO of a company called Raygun.
Yeah, correct. And thanks for having me on, John. So I've been a nerd since the early days. I got into programming when I was 9, and I always have the line that discovering programming was like discovering an infinite box of Lego. Like I didn't have to ask my parents to go and buy like 10 more if statements because I wanted to build something different. And so I was like, this is amazing. And just fell in love with it. I've always been a bit of a builder, and so I knew I wanted to build a software company from the early days. And 2007, stepped out and launched our business. It was originally called Mindscape, building dev tools predominantly for .NET developers. And then in 2012, we built a product called Raygun, and we launched that under the raygun.io domain at the time. 2013, that went into customers' hands, and that product really did so well for us that everything else kind of fell by the wayside, and that became the big new thing. And we've been really focused on that for the last few years.
Amazing. Yeah, I took the liberty of bringing up the Wayback Machine. As I like to say, it's the high school yearbook of the internet. And this is what the site used to look like back in 2013. You had one product. And I think
Yep.
earlier you were telling me that your conversion rates were fantastic because it was a singly minded focused sort of product orientation.
Yep.
And, back in the day, you were offering sort of solutions for managing and tracking software errors.
Yeah, so we started out in software crash reporting, and this is certainly an early version. The product looks a lot different now; does a lot more.
Yep.
I still laugh if you scroll down slightly, and this was because I had a good friend in the space. But like, look at our language support:
Oh,
.NET, JavaScript,
CodeFusion, that's hot.
PHP. That was it. And the crazy thing is, my friend who worked on that actually he built the very first SDK, and he built it for that. So like the default in all of our systems actually is that as the first item in the list. And so whenever you say if you've got anything where we haven't managed the data right, the reporting systems will be like, man, CodeFusion's really taking.
Yep. Yep.
But
So
no, this
as you,
site converted well.
yeah, so as you mentioned, the year was 2007. To give people some context, maybe the millennials and Gen Z folks may not have the best memory about this, but the iPhone had just been announced. So was Google Street View, if I remember correctly. I was at
Mhm.
Microsoft at the time, and we were just about to enter the Great Recession, unbeknownst to everyone, of course. And you decide, I'm going to launch this thing. I mean, the timing is perfect because everyone says that the best time to start a company is in a downturn. And I'm curious to understand, what was your motivation for starting Raygun? Like, can I assume that you were building applications and you got frustrated by the state of application error tracking and just thought, that's it, I'm going to start this thing and fix this problem once and for all?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So we did start in 2007, but we launched this product in 2013. And in the meantime, what we'd been doing was manually instrumenting our products. They were kind of more components, download them. We don't know anything. This was our first foray into building an always-on service that had to be up and all of that good stuff. And the sort of genesis behind it was that I'd started the Mindscape originally with Jeremy Boyd as my business partner, and he'd brought me into my first coding job, professional coding job, I should say. And he was just absolute ninja at coding, and I kind of looked at why was this guy able to produce better code than many other people, and what it was that he was instrumenting his code to send himself emails whenever there was an unhandled exception way back in
Ah,
like the early 2000s. And I kind of adopted this approach from him when we were at the company Intergen, and it was great because you'd get these emails and you'd be like, "Oh shoot, yeah, I've screwed something up. I'll just quickly push that out into production before the customer even gets in touch with us." And I was like, this was like the holy grail of keeping a customer happy. It was a real eye opener. And so when we were looking at what we wanted to build as a service, I was like, you know what? Actually, trying to manage that out of your inbox was kind of crappy. It was a bad experience.
hmm.
You couldn't really have a lot of workflow. again, the younger folks might not appreciate this, but this was back in the day of having like a 20 megabyte inbox. So, you could quickly
Awesome.
fill up your whole quota with just sending error notifications. And so we wanted to build a whole lot of tooling around that. What was interesting too is that obviously we dog food our own software, so we instrumented all of those old components to say like, hey, the Visual Studio integration, like send us any faults. And what we recognized was that only about 1% of our customers, and keep in mind these are fellow developers, right, so they're technical and all this, only about 1% would ever tell us that something went wrong. And so it's a really interesting domain to be in, because it obviously helps the developer to have a whole lot of context, but the business side of you is kind of going, wow, you want to really dramatically lower your cost to acquire a customer, like make sure that you don't have a lot more faults. And a lot of people look at things like how many people are coming through, say, Zendesk or Intercom or however you manage support. And it's like, oh, we've got 30. And in my head, I'm like, okay, times that by 100, that's probably the scale of the problem, and so Raygun crash reporting kind of gives you that insight, because it's just kind of quietly sitting there recording any faults that are occurring and sending them through. So it actually allowed us to improve our own products. It helps our customers do that as well. That's the newer site. A little bit more slick.
Yeah, before and after the weight loss.
The high irony is, of course, we love and promote performance, and I guarantee this website is a lot heavier than the old one.
Yep. That's the nature of the internet. It's I like to call it the obesity crisis of web pages, where you have images that are over a meg, and whatever. That's another topic for another time. But anyways, so Raygun, I've always been impressed by Raygun. You guys have a really impressive portfolio of products, and you mentioned error reporting and crash reporting. So speaking personally for a second here, I know that as a developer, we hate crashes. And of course, the worst part of crashes is that, one, they occur when you least suspect them. And this is why the phrase "works on my machine" became so popular and a bit of a joke. And two, they often occur in isolation. And that is, it's typically on a customer's machine away from developers. And I'm reminded of that tagline from the movie Aliens: in space, no one can hear you scream. And it also reminds me of that expression, if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? And with Raygun, not only can you tell me, yes, it did, but here's the type of tree that fell and where it landed, and here are the other trees nearby that are about to fall next. Can you tell me about how Raygun helps developers, specifically in the case of errors in their applications, and then how it helps them make sense of those errors as the crashes as they occur?
Yeah, so you're right, and interestingly, you noted earlier, the iPhone coming out.
Yeah.
And folks are probably aware there's a few crash reporting solutions available for mobile. And the thing is that really educated people on the power of having a dedicated solution, because the thing was you couldn't connect to your customer's iPhone and read a log file, right? So you had to have some sort of middleware service in the mix. We support mobile stuff. Often we migrate folks off of things like Crashlytics or whatnot, because people want to track everything that's in there. So what we see as the golden path for customers was usually they'll sign up. It takes about 15 minutes to put code in there. These days we support more than just CodeFusion and PHP. We support pretty much everything, and hooking it up, great timing on the scrolling there, hooking it up to things like Slack or Teams. And so we see a little bit of that sort of, the term kind of came and went, but the chat ops stuff. So you'll see the errors come through. We actually have a pretty advanced alerting system now as well, where you can configure all sorts of levels of alert. And we see teams sort of get those come in, have a conversation about it. They can jump in and get the context they need. Being that we sell to developers, I don't see this anymore, but I remembered back at Intergen when I was working there, and when you did even get a helpful customer, sometimes they'd send you, and hilariously, it was usually a screenshot of your own error page.
Oh, the best. Those are the best ones. You have no sense of what's going on.
Absolutely. In a Word doc, And
even better.
The thing that would always crush you, right, is you were like, man, this customer has really gone all out to try and get this solved, not realizing that they're not telling me anything. And so this is where, like, to the developer, you get stack traces, you get anything we can pick up. I describe it to like non-technical users as like, it's like a black box flight recorder for your code. When it blows up, you will know exactly where it is. The other thing too is, our philosophy is we want to sell to, small startups through to giant companies. And so our product has to scale for a lot of different scenarios in that case. So we do things like fingerprinting on the errors. So, we had one customer and they had, I think it was like 4 million errors a month. And that was actually only about 1,000 root cause bugs. Then we can sort it by the number of impacted customers. And so we would sort of work with them because some people, it's kind of like, turning up with your home hose to a forest fire and going like, how do I even start?
Yep.
And that's the thing. It's like sort by customers impacted, maybe put 1 or 2 bugs in each sprint, and we had massive brands out there, like, won't name them, but let's say top 2 soda maker in the world, kind of go, hey, we've reduced faults on our platform by like 98% within 12 months just by kind of going through this process. Yeah, and that's the thing. Interestingly, we started our life really selling through developers because as a developer myself, I can see how helpful this is.
Yeah.
But like I say, the reality is it's actually more about a customer experience solution for business. So if you're talking with your managers and bosses and stuff, that's probably how they're going to see the value of it. But it really is a super help to the developer to kind of go, oh, yeah, I need to put a null check around this, or, oh, it's not being set under this code path. That sort of stuff. It's super useful.
I have to ask, and this is more of a side question, and it's okay if you don't want to answer it, but let me provide some context here. So, I'll start with the question first. Like, which tech stack do you think does the best job in terms of errors? And what I mean is, like, how you use some tech stacks and where some errors are super obvious. You're like, oh, that's like they're very informative. You get it, and then you use other tech stacks, and the errors are like, what? What do you mean? I know that it depends. Like you're talking about libraries, etc. But in general, like, which tech stack do you think does a really good job of supporting what Raygun does around errors and crashes? And I realize this is like asking a parent which of their children they like the most, but feel free to provide your little opinion here.
Well, I like my oldest child the most. He's also my youngest child, so that helps. But
there you go. Yep.
It's an interesting question because it depends which dimension you look at. You mentioned from a Raygun standpoint. In that case, nearly all languages are actually fairly good. There's a pretty stock standard way to integrate with. Personally, though, and we have a few old blog posts on this, I like to talk to developers about writing good error messages.
Yep.
Because a lot of people, I mentioned fingerprinting and grouping. And so this is actually a massive topic in its own right. It's really, really hard to do good identity of errors. And so an example there is, putting a value in the message of an error. So, value cannot be 6. That's kind of actually a bad idea. You want the message to actually be what the error was, and then providing that context. So, in sort of like, I know in .NET, for example, you can put in a dictionary of other values, as part of the exception object to give context. And so sometimes it's more a case of less about a singular language being good or bad, but making sure that the exception handling systems in a platform are quite extensible and have a lot of metadata that can be fleshed out to give more context to developers. I will, however, say there are a few programming languages that make it more difficult to support, and they're typically the programming languages that use things like error codes, and they're a little bit more low level. So you might be, I think, they've probably improved it now, but I remember when I was very early looking at Rust, that was something where it was a little bit more challenging to put in there, stuff like that. But generally, most of them are pretty good because, what is programming if not sitting there writing a few lines, right? Oh, it doesn't work. Okay, why doesn't it work? Okay, fix that. Run again. Okay, oh, now it doesn't work. Like, you're just in that cycle is how we ship software. So nearly all of them are pretty solid in that regard. I will say, going back to that identity point, JavaScript is a really fascinating one.
Why is that?
Well, so I give talking about the identity problem. Like, Raygun itself probably has about 15 different language level groupers, and then multiple versions of those groupers that have been improved with time based on data that customers have provided. And the interesting thing with JavaScript is early on, like if you were trying to group that stuff, like Internet Explorer, which this last week I think has finally been put down, taken to the farm upstate, and Microsoft being good citizen that they are, they would localize errors into the language that was in the user's browser. So if you were using the Arabic language, the whole exception was Arabic based. So we had to put in things like a layer that says, actually, we're going to translate that back to the resource file based on what IE has to make sure it's readable. Then you had cross-browser issues. So we had, I think this is going back a little bit now, but you had things like the same error could have exactly the same stack trace, but I think it was IE again was like off by one line on every single line, and you're like, okay, so that's going to look different but the same. Similarly, a lot of the browsers do have variable values that go into messages, so you can't just use the message. And where we ended up going with a lot of this stuff is you've got some very complex logic kind of going, hey, and we did things like pull all the resource files from all the browsers to sort of go, what are all of the exceptions they possibly could throw, sub out all of the values, look at grouping those. Then take into account which ones of those match across different browsers. So kind of say, it might be called this on a Chromium engine, but this in a Firefox engine, and this in IE, but they're the same error. So we don't want to create 3 different groups. We want to make sure that they look like one to you, and you've got the context in there, and you can see which browser distribution. So you can really go down a deep rabbit hole on a lot of these things, and they become quite language or platform specific. And then, of course, you get the folks who go, I would like the JavaScript provider to just work with Node. And it's like, okay, we can do that. But again, the grouper kind of gets just bananas at this point.
I will readily admit I had not even considered this at all. And now that you've talked through this, you're absolutely right. This is, wow, that's a very big rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's interesting because, not to spend too long on competitors or anything, but a lot of folks do sort of initially think that error identity would be a pretty simple problem, or like maybe just a regex could be used. And it's like, you will find, well, trust me, there's multi-billion-dollar players out there that just use one regex, and it's not great. But you've really got to go down this. We've probably put, I don't know, probably like 5 man-years worth of time into building those groupers alone. They're quite a significant investment. They're all very mature now, but like I say, every now and then you kind of get some insights where it's like, oh, this error here needs some special handling.
So just switching gears a little bit, you guys launched RUM, or Real User Monitoring, back in October 2015. And I'm curious to know, what was the backstory here? Like, what inspired you guys to build this out?
Yeah, so crash reporting is great for when things blow up, right? And so this is a multi-dimensional reason that we built this product. And so the second thing, like if we use the black box flight recorder for crash reporting, I kind of thought of RUM as being the equivalent of the airline ratings website, and performance is a big part of experience. So you want to ensure that customers are having a speedy experience. You'll see right there, for example, we put a lot of time into things like histograms and drillable histograms to really say, what is my P99? Like, why did the P99 go so damn slow? So we built this out for that reason. We were also getting customers asking for that, saying, hey, it's all well and good. Now I've got my errors down. Now I'm sort of turning my eye to, is the site fast? And we started with Real User Monitoring, which is measuring from the browser. We of course support more than that. So we'll support iOS, Android. Basically, a Real User Monitoring product has to operate where the customer is to measure their experience. And that's what the real user part is, right? So we see a lot of people ask for synthetics. I just want to ping a site, see if what's the load time, how's that going? The reality is they're actually solving 2 different domains of problems. Like a synthetic test, you're kind of looking at a baseline and seeing if there's a change. So maybe we've done a deployment and you're kind of doing an apples with apples comparison. Real user monitoring is kind of acknowledging that some of your customers are using outdated phones and they're checking the website while they're on a hike in the hills. And, some people have, you're kind of getting the real insights about what's happening with your website or mobile app. The other dimension of this was we wanted to ensure that, like, this is going to sound corny, but best to be, authentic about this, is in an ideal world, somebody would put in crash reporting and go and resolve a lot of their bugs, right? And we price on data volumes. And so there was this element where it's like, well, we're actually kind of a little bit misaligned here, because we want our customers to be successful, and the more successful the customer becomes, the less money they pay the business, because there's less errors that fix them, right?
That's right. It's like a
Yeah.
doctor telling telling their patients to get healthier, and they do, and then they never come
Yeah.
back. So
Well, that's right. I actually went to my doctor this week. I'm turning 40 shortly. And I said, "What should I get?" And he said, "You're fine." And I was like, "Yeah, a little. You should be encouraging people to get
yeah,
checked." Anyway, so there was this element of that. It wasn't a big driver, but we wanted to kind of start ensuring that some of our products would get additional usage if our customers were successful. So if you made your websites faster, your experience better, our view is that you're likely to start getting more and more engagement, more customers, and grow your business. So you're not going to be
yeah,
concerned that bill is going up, because theoretically, if you've got 20% more traffic, you've probably got 20% more revenue growth, and
yep.
that's what we want to help with. So it was a multi reason for putting this in there. The other thing that we have as a product principle in our business is that all the products automatically integrate, so you don't have to connect them up. But if you have crash reporting and RUM, well, now if you look at a crash report, you can actually see the user's entire session and navigation flow that took them to that page, rather than just a handful of breadcrumbs of recent events. You can see their entire session.
Right.
And that can be useful, because you might find situations where, and we had this early on, where one navigation path sets state correctly and another navigation path doesn't. And so knowing that it's because the customer took this route to the page where the error occurred is actually a key piece of metadata. And
Mm,
similarly, once we have all the session information, and this is a super key metric that customers use, crash free user percentage. So if we
mm.
see every session, how many sessions had an error in it, and track that. So we've had customers like uh, well, I was going to say technically I can't name them, but you know who made Game of Thrones. But we tracked the finale of Game of Thrones for about 84 million concurrent viewers. So every single set-top box, whatever that was
Wow.
streaming Game of Thrones went through that RUM product and helped them understand where the bottlenecks were, what was impacting streaming performance, all of that sort of stuff. And that goes back to the other philosophy of, we want the pricing to be low enough that a small business can go, look, 40, 60 bucks, whatever, we can get started. And when I talk about scaling it, it's more about scaling. Obviously, the price does scale, but the product shouldn't ever be in a situation where it can't meet the demands of a large customer. And so
Right.
I'm sure we'll talk tech stack, but our product scales remarkably, remarkably well. And like I say, in that one scenario, that was one customer at 84 million people at once, which, as you tell from the accent, we're headquartered here in New Zealand. That's, I think, about 17 times the population of our entire country, all at once for
Well, it
one
depends on what you're
customer.
counting. If you're counting people, fair. But if you're counting sheep, maybe not. I don't know.
This is true. We still
Yeah.
have a multiple in there. But yeah, so giving those insights, rolling them up, but also letting people drill right down to say, like, if somebody was in the P99.9 bucket, I
Yeah.
want to see the incomplete stack of everything that loaded, so I can understand where or what caused that outlier, so I might have a chance of resolving it.
Yeah. Rum seems like it seems like such a challenging space to track because to me as a developer, like I'm going to speak like Key Rock caveman lawyer here. World frightens and confuses me, right? But it seems like that with Rum, the goalposts are always shifting in terms of application performance. And what I mean by that is like it's especially true when you consider like user-centric performance metrics for web apps. Like web apps are the big thing. And like forever, I remember when just a kid growing up and cutting HTML and stuff, but like we've all built a number of web apps. Like I think all of us in the industry have built web apps. And for the longest time, web devs were told time to first byte is the best measure, right? And then the folks around the industry were starting like, no, actually, it's actually measure time to first paint or
Hmm.
time to first contentful paint or total blocking time or time for to interactive. Like there's so many measures around RUM that I mean, it kind of makes your head spin a little bit around what's really meaningful and what's important. What are your takes on sort of like application performance relative to web dev?
Yeah, so it's a good question. What I'd say is typically what we see from RUM is that you might find some particularly performance-minded developers are really, really into it, but it
Mm,
actually sort of resonates more with maybe like product manager, basically people who wear that tension between the commercial reality and the code, which frankly, is not a lot of developers. We
Mm.
often are busy solving our own problems. It's not a wild criticism. It's just sort of acknowledging the domain. I go back to the fact that, like the time to first byte one, that to me sort of smells again of something that is very engineering specific,
Yeah.
and kind of going, that is important. But it's kind of like server monitoring. And I know we haven't talked APM yet, but I kind of make the joke to people. I'm like, a lot of people seem to forget that the A in application performance management is about the app, and yet most APMs are kind of like, here's what your servers are doing. I'm like, no one cares about the server. We care about the customer experience, like,
Yep. Yep.
and so to that end, I think the industry is catching up to what matters. So the example I use here is Amazon. And so Amazon's measure way back in the day was how long until the search bar at the top of the site is rendered. That was their key metric for performance. And you can see how that connects to the customer experience, because their view is, the customer is likely going to try and find something. So how long does it take them to be able to get to that point? And so I generally would encourage anybody to be thinking about those customer-led metrics as being the real health, because you can end up optimizing for things that just don't matter. Like kind of like with Amdahl's law, you could look at things where time to first byte and be trying to adjust that. But if that's only making up 2% of the load time, you could optimize that to 0 and it doesn't matter. And without getting too preachy about it, I think we all know that the modern web stack can be a little on the overweight side at times. And so often where the wins are not actually at that server level anymore. Servers have kind of gone from the picture.
When I think about this, it's like you're treating the symptom, not the problem. And but it's a reverse sort of thing. Like the actual problem is the fact that the customer is not seeing anything being drawn in the browser. And it's like, we've got to fix that problem first. You mentioned APM, so we might as well talk a little bit about that. So you launched APM in 2018, if I remember correctly, and it's awesome. Like I love a good flame graph and flame chart just as much as the next guy. But man, when you look at them and it's like your head explodes, you kind of feel like Towley from South Park. You're like, oh man, I have no idea what's going on. But in all seriousness, APM to me eliminates a lot of the opacity of what's happening on the server side. So can you talk a little bit about kind of like, obviously this is the sort of next step, but the motivations that went behind this and kind of the benefits that you're seeing with customers that are using this?
Yeah, so we built this one because of customer demand. And really where that was coming from was we were getting quite a lot of customers saying, I would move from another vendor all of my stuff onto Raygun if you guys could do this piece for me as well.
Got it. Yep.
And so we did. We don't have as much language support in this product at this point, because building code profiling engines and things like that is a lot more involved than crash reporting. And like I talked about earlier, we've taken a very heavy focus to the code in the app. So we're not looking hugely at the servers and things like that. We're not pulling your AWS CloudWatch metrics and charging you for a better view of that. This is really focused on the code that you run. Now, we started off with .NET. We've got full framework, .NET Core on Linux now as well, Ruby and Node. And we're going to be launching support for Java shortly. If anybody is hearing this, and we'd love more people to be on that beta list, so get in touch. But what we wanted to do is then say, hey, well, let's say and even in Rum, we can say things like, oh, it took 3 seconds on the back end. Well, now part of that sort of 1 + 1 is 3 is if you actually use both the products, you can click on that and get this flame chart for, well, okay, what happened in that 3 seconds? What did it do? And you'll see like the colors in there, they're making up, they're telling you about queries, external web service calls, your code, and it fully integrates with source control. So you can actually click on these bars and it will be like, this is the function, this is what it's doing. So helping those developers very quickly kind of look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's some really dumb code. That's not going to be efficient. Like a really common, I guess, pattern I see, and I'll be honest, I see it in my own code too. We often build things on our dev machines and we'll usually have sparse or lightweight amount of data, and so we build something and it can be quite quick. A good example was, in our own case, was making sure we could support that that data load from Game of Thrones, right? It's like, well, I'm
Mm.
unlikely to simulate 84 million concurrent users on my machine.
On your own machine, no less. Yeah.
Yeah, so it gets hard. So this is really like helps you test in production, see how the code's going. We do have the usual things like app decks and performance, but again, you're kind of looking for the outliers that are in there and going in and tuning that up. And so what I love seeing is customers who send us those charts, the classic, like here's the load time drops to almost nothing,
Oh, yeah.
We also, and if you just hold on that picture there, you'll see on the side there's that, we call it the error inbox and crash reporting, but over there, yep, that we've always had the view as well that a lot of the tools in the space, they'll have they're effectively a view over a database, and it's like build some visualizations and figure it out yourself, and
Yep.
and I don't know if it's the businessman in me or what, but I'm like, I don't want people to have to sit around and figure out what the problem is. I want to actually build a list of issues and say, you can go and assign these and go fix them. And so we've actually brought that idea into APM from crash reporting, where you can see there's an active list of known performance issues that you could go and do, and you can build up your own rules. You can then say you've resolved them. You can choose known issues that you may say, actually, we want to ignore this because yep, it's slow. We can't figure out how to make this piece faster, so don't bug us about it. So all of that sort of tooling to really aid in the workflow of a development team.
Mm. Yeah, it speaks to a lot of the things I like about Raygun. So I was gonna jump around a little bit, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about is obviously you had mentioned the fact that you have this issues list. One of the things that I love about Raygun is that it plays really well with others. You have an extensive ecosystem of plugins.
Yep.
And one of the things that frustrates me as a developer is that when I use a product, it doesn't integrate with other products. Like I think it's a huge missed opportunity for a lot of folks. This is just me speaking, like, just as a customer, especially when you consider how many products exist. I mean, like, so for example, if we take, for example, like I love GitHub and I use
hmm
it daily and I consider it like an essential part of my workflow and my tech stack. And so instead of saying we don't work with GitHub or figure it out yourself, Raygun comes along and says, no, please continue to use GitHub. We love GitHub too. In fact, here's an integration that ties errors and traces to issues, and it's a better together story that I love.
Yeah, 100%. And quite frankly, again, as a developer myself, um, I've always leaned a little bit more to liking to use the best of breed tools. So,
Yes.
you kind of have the two sort of silos of thinking here, which is, some people want one platform that does everything, but maybe isn't the best at everything, but it's one place and that's cool. That's cool. And then, I want to use the tools of my choice in here. We also, as part of that, recently, about a year ago now, actually, we launched our new alerting stack, which is a much more comprehensive and capable sort of. We call it alerting, but it's really an automation layer on top of the events that get fed into Raygun. And so you can then hook that up to things like Zapier now and go,
Mm,
actually, I can now
yep.
connect to anything Zapier does. And we had one customer just blew my mind where what they were doing, they have an online ordering system for food. And what would happen is they set up an experience where if the order failed for some reason, it would use our alerting engine to send the order that the person had to the store that was going to be making that order. And so the store would get an email, which was actually a glorified Raygun, alert, saying this was it. And the store could then ring up the customer and say, "Hey, we know you tried to order from us. Would you like us to still make, the food for you?" And that's an example which I think we're going to see more and more in the coming years, which is, a lot of these tools can be used to give amazing customer experiences because that stream of data is actually activity and event data about how your customers are engaging with your software. And I sometimes make the analogy that not enough people think about their software as being like a retail store, maybe like McDonald's. And I sort of say, if Ray Kroc had started McDonald's, well, he didn't start it, but let's just say he did for a second. So, let's say he's trying to build up McDonald's, but every second store was filthy. Every third hamburger had rancid meat in it. Like, do you
Mm.
think McDonald's would have become a huge dominant company? And the answer is fairly obviously no. Like nobody's like, yes, let's go get some food poisoning. But we're still at the point where I think complexity in software has us often thinking more about solving the technical problems and missing the point of the customer. And so that's where it's like, okay, the more we can get folks thinking about how to use these tools to improve and create amazing customer experiences, that's all that really matters. You might have errors that occur because some crappy bot hits your website, and that's why we have tools like permanently ignore. Like, just don't worry about that stuff, but focus on the customer.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I did want to mention this because I think it was very interesting. Raygun's a very polyglot friendly organization. You support more languages and more tech stacks than a lot of other folks that I've seen. How do you guys manage all of this? And secondly, it must be awesome to be a developer at Raygun because you get to target you get to play with a lot of different toys. Like, you get to target so many different languages and tech stacks.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say firstly, it's not super easy. So nearly all of these we did start internally ourselves. We have had some support from the community. So all of these are also open source, so people can jump in and patch things and whatnot. We do occasionally, get specialized contractors in, because one of the risks you run when you're supporting so many languages is that you may miss, some of the idioms of a platform that, if I bring, say, I mean, I still write a little bit of code every now and then, sadly not as much as I wish, but I come from a
Yep.
.NET background. And
Okay.
so it's like, it would be wrong of me to sort of presume I understand, how Ruby coders think about some of these things and how they like to integrate. So we do a little bit of that as well. But yeah, there's a lot of language experience there. Raygun's it's an interesting company in that regard because I guess one of the things that one of my philosophies is trying to scale the business more on individual impact. So not growing necessarily headcount, but actually saying, how much impact do you feel each day as a member of the team? And an example I give is we had an intern that we brought her on as a full-time employee after she finished university, and she'd made some changes to a JavaScript file, which was actually our Raygun for JS script that's used for RUM and crash reporting on the front end, and she pushed it up, and I went and said, hey, so do you know that file gets loaded 1.2 billion times a month? And that kind of like, oh my goodness.
Did she freak out? Like, I was like, oh my God.
Well, it's like, we not to toot your horn here, but it's like we've been users of build CI/CD pipelines for a long time. We have a lot of tests. We've got those things to give us safety and in there. And so that's the thing, though, is like going back to the experience of being a developer here. It's like you're not part of a humongous team, but what you're doing, you're like, man, like it has impact. So that's been really interesting. And furthermore, I won't go into too many details, but we get a lot of feedback that people can't believe how much we spend on our infrastructure, effectively how low it is. And they say, but you're storing all of the raw data. I can get every single piece of raw data that I ever sent to Raygun within the retention period, if I want. But your bill is so low. It's like, how'd you do it? And, to slightly bastardize the quote from The Martian, we computer science the out of that thing, and it's like, that's how you do it. And so we attract a lot of talent that are deep technical, performance-minded engineers, like our APM product. We have people, they're sitting there going, I know exactly how registers on a CPU get loaded and how we need to think about this stuff for performance. And so, as you know, like, bottom of the South Pacific, which there's not actually a lot of organizations doing work at that sort of level, and then to have that follow-on impact. I was actually thinking about that the other day, though, right? I was like, we've got Octopus deploy down here, we got build kite, so you got the build service, the deployments, you got the monitoring. I'm like,
yep.
Slowly the APAC region's going to eat the world.
I like it. At the time of this recording, this is the February timeframe, 2023. You launched earlier today. You launched the Raygun API beta. So congratulations, and
thank you.
I'm curious, like, what necessitated this API? Did you have a lot of customers asking for it? Please tell us what motivated for you guys to provide this.
Yeah, it's a good question. So similar to, I guess, I realize I'm sharing a fair bit of my business philosophy here as well as engineering philosophy, but
Yep.
Raygun is not a heavily funded business. So we recycle our positive cash flows into growth. And we did early on, quite frankly, we benefited from free ingress into cloud providers. So people could send us this mountain of data, but we were concerned about the data going back out because we'd be billed for that at the time. And this was really, I'm talking 2013 when we launched. We were a much, much smaller organization then. And so we didn't really build a whole lot about pulling data out or being able to do things programmatically. We built this beautiful experience in the app for people to work with it. Then when we put in alerting a couple of years ago, like I say, it's much more of an automation engine than it is actually an alerting capability.
Mm-hmm.
And we started seeing some of these amazing things that customers were dreaming up that we couldn't have thought about, in 100 years. And so that really led us down the path of going, what if we make our entire platform API enabled? So what if Raygun, what if, like, in theory, what if you could build an entire Raygun clone that's simply called the APIs? And so we're building that out now. This is why this is in beta. We've got a handful of early APIs. We've got a work stream. It's going to be a perpetual work stream at Raygun of backfilling out any APIs that we don't have done yet, making sure that people can do whatever they want. So one of the reasons there is one of our product philosophies has always been about being somewhat prescriptive. We talked about that action list before and saying,
Yep.
we want to tell you, go and fix this thing. But I always talk about the need for escape hatches, which is to say, you don't always know better than the customer. They can have some really curly edge cases, like everybody does. And so initially we thought the API is something to sort of go, hey, well, you can do whatever you want. And then we're like, what if we made this a real first-class citizen experience? So, what if we give people a wonderful CLI? What if we make sure that, again, this integrates with other systems, and then we let them build whatever they want? And so we're starting to see things where people might have the alerting engine fire a webhook, that then calls an API that performs a function in Raygun that then triggers another alert that goes off, and effectively allowing people to build on top of it. And so we're seeing things like, and we do have some APIs that aren't listed there that are sort of privately being used at the moment. But that's things like being able to say, hey, well, I'd like to pull in the customer journey data into like Zendesk or something. So I want to be able to see all of that information, because a great example we have with Raygun, going back to that, when a customer reports an error, is you want to be able to just jump straight off and see the error or see their journeys that they've had, and actually help the support person get an understanding of what were they doing, what could be the issue, and how do I ensure I give them a better reply based on the context that the product gives us. So being able to build those integrations as well yourself will be cool. Appreciate your comment about how we integrate with other people, but that's the same thing as at the moment our integrations are generally built by us, maintained by us. And it's like, well, we'd really love it if third parties could say, you know what, we're an upstart in this category. We don't want to, I'm a founder. I know what it's like to be right at the start of the journey, and I don't want to say, look, you've got a two-sided market problem here. You're not going to bring enough users for us to warrant this yet, but we want you to be able to build that as well. So effectively opening up the extensibility. We also have the product philosophy that all of the data we get, it's your data. We're not doing anything with it. We don't even benchmark between customers. It's your data. We abide by all the GDPRs and everything like that. But if you take that further out, it's like, cool, well, if it's your data, we also want to give you all of the tools to do whatever the heck you want with your data, not just what we think you should be allowed to do with your data. So it's a really exciting time. It's a beginning of a much, much bigger journey that'll play out over the next probably 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think you really hit it home for me, which is we provide the API, then that provides the facilities for developers to build on top. I think of the not Bull Durham, Bull Durham, Field of Dreams. The expression, if you build it, they will come. They being the developers, and they'll come along and show you things that you couldn't even dream of, which is amazing. And congrats on the new API. And here's looking to the journey 3-4 years out. I don't think it will take you that long to get there, to be honest. But just on that note, like the tech stack you mentioned earlier, I did want to briefly touch a little bit about what your tech stack is. Like we mentioned the fact that obviously you have integrations with anything, it seems. But as far as your tech stack running Raygun, what are you guys mostly using?
Yeah, so we're entirely hosted on Amazon Web Services for the hosting. We actually don't use, going back to that point about computer science, we don't use a whole lot of their higher level services because we optimize the code that runs on instances pretty hard. Then what we have is we've got a mixture at the moment. We're effectively .NET on the back end, so C# and .NET across the board. We've got some parts of the system that are still on full framework, and more of the system is in .NET Core. So at the moment, and I mean, for the viewers who are unfamiliar, one of the big wins of .NET Core was Microsoft have made huge investments in performance. We actually have a Microsoft case study on the Microsoft customer side about a 2,000% improvement in throughput of our API when we shifted that from Node to .NET Core, which is a funny story. I'll tell it quickly for the audience because they'll get a chuckle out of this. So went way better using .NET Core, and this blew up online at the time, and it was like on Reddit and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. And the funny thing was that the opinion was split. Half of the audience was like, well, that's because you're .NET coders, you don't know how to optimize Node, you just, you're morons. That's why you've got this performance win.
Okay.
And then the other half was like, well, duh, it was Node. It's slow as. And so we just didn't
win. You can't win. You just can't win. You can't impress anyone. You just can't win.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see there that we saw a huge throughput and enhancement there. And to be honest, that was the only part we used Node in. And the reason was at the time was .NET full framework didn't work on Linux and .NET Core did. And because our API layer was sort of auto scaling, we did want Linux instances in there, partly to control cost and things like that, which is why we had Node in the mix. Anyway, we're now, most of the ingestion pipeline and all that back end is now sort of on .NET Core. Most of it, or not, I think about half of it's on 6, about half of it's still on 3. We're moving the 3s up to 6. And we're kind of closing in on the migration of the main web app, which again, the .NET audience folks will know that that's probably going to be the messiest part, moving I think it's an MVC 5 full framework app. It's a yeah. But the problem is it's like you gotta move all of the supporting libraries and all that. So it's just an ongoing piece of work. It's a funny one because we have this debate. It's like, do you call this tech debt? And it's like, well, not really, because Microsoft kind of chose to make this jump. It wasn't like we chose not to. And again, .NET coders will probably know this, but it was actually pretty hard to migrate anything to .NET Core before version 3. It wasn't really fully API fleshed out and all that.
This is what they say about Microsoft. Wait till the 3rd version. Every multiple of 3 is going to be the best one. So
yeah. But having said that, it has been a huge win for us on the performance side. It's enabled different deployment approaches. A lot of good stuff has come out of it. So that's where it's like we don't really think of it purely as a tech debt situation. We do see it as a big amount of work to make this move, but it's actually an investment in our deployment options and scalability and all of that great stuff. So, and as you will know, I'm person passionate about software performance. I have loved watching all the work they've been doing on that and reading, all of the different articles about performance wins that they've been landing.
100%. Steven Taub's one of my favorite bloggers. He's one of the performance folks at Microsoft, and you better hurry up because .NET 8 just preview 1 just dropped, and so you guys are gonna get like the racehorses out, and soon you're gonna be at .NET 9, .NET 10, and you're like, wait, stop, we haven't even gone to 6 yet. So lots of things to consider for sure. I did want to wrap things up by talking about something that's a little bit, well, maybe not esoteric, but certainly relevant. I was curious to know if you had any thoughts or opinions about OpenTelemetry.
Yeah, absolutely do. Firstly, I think OpenTelemetry is awesome. It's great to see some standards in the space. And what our observation was early on, we weren't an early adopter of it. Around when we were launching our APM, there was a little bit of a split across the ecosystem. So there was some early murmurings about OpenTelemetry, but there was also things like, I think it was called OpenCensus, and there was technically another one called OpenMetrics and whatnot. But over the recent years, I think OpenCensus and OpenTelemetry kind of merged together and sort of went, there's no point in us trying to have competing standards here if it's meant to be about vendor engagement. And so we're looking at OpenTelemetry in terms of us supporting it. We'll both in terms of ingesting as well as providing our data out where it can support the OpenTelemetry format.
Nice.
So yeah, we're fans of it. We don't have formal support yet, but the year is still young.
Yeah, I mean, you have to consider the fact that, things are moving pretty quick. I mean, you've got various libraries available. You've got various specs that are also still being written. It's almost like they're laying the railroad track as the train's barreling down the track, sort of thing. But you're right. I think there's a lot of promise in this. And I am definitely encouraged by what I've seen in this space, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I think that kind of coming together was important to really kind of make it become a big thing. I will say, a difficulty in running an organization like Raygun that is sort of doing some sort of runtime integration is, we all know that ongoing joke about, every day, 500 new JavaScript frameworks launch, and
Sure.
while
1,000
that's,
ships.
yeah, while it's slightly apocryphal, the reality is supporting developers means you are having to support people who are using every random thing under the sun and kind of go, why don't you support this? And if you don't support it, you must be terrible. And you're like, nobody's really using that thing yet. So you've got to pick your bets. Usually it's a case that if you're not supporting something that becomes popular, it's not because you don't think it's good. It's just that at the time it wasn't popular enough to adopt, and then you kind of pick it up. That's also why we push things like you couldn't do it with OpenTelemetry at this point until we support it through our back end, but it's why our SDKs are open source. It's like, hey, you know what? If you do want to use something a bit edgy and out there, we'll happily support and engage with you on a repo and help you get it done. But we might not be delivering it as a first class thing ourselves if we think there's only going to be like 2 customers using it. It's just that classic resource allocation challenge that we all face in all businesses.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here. I mean, we have the same philosophy, I think, at Octopus, which is basically, we have a lot of customers who build some amazing things, and we're like, that's fantastic. I did want to wrap things up with talking a little bit about Raygun, like what's next. What can customers expect in the months and years ahead? I'm not obviously asking for the entire roadmap, but is there a hard problem relating to monitoring and observability that you're looking to tackle, or is it more of a case you're just looking to make the product better and better?
So we, I would consider our products as having a fairly good product market fit. Like I say, we're a company that actually is profitable, hasn't needed boatloads of funding, or very similar to the Octopus story, actually, in that I know there was a funding type event, but the business had actually already gotten quite far on its own. And so what we're looking at this point is this year we'll probably be polishing up a few things a little bit more, just making sure the experience is as good as it can be. We will be looking at things around APM and extending that. I mentioned Java support coming. The OpenTelemetry question is pretty high on the APM team's list to sort of dig into there. We will continue expanding that API stuff. That's going to probably be the key narrative in there for the next wee while. There may be a couple of little products that crop up that I can't sort of talk about yet, but they'll be, again, kind of based on customer feedback of saying, hey, well, if we could have this, we can consolidate more over here. There's plenty of work to be done. Like every company, there is the infinite backlog somewhere, and we just pick what we're going to work on there. We're probably outside of the API over the next 12 months, not going to be looking at any sort of astronomically different features. We have spun up a sort of work stream to look at some of these AI tools around the data that we have in here.
Nice.
And sort of and so there's some promising things in there. I've been reading a lot in that category, and the narrative kind of seems to be that businesses should be looking at what data do they receive from customers, and then what sort of AI additions could you put with that data to help them get more. And so we've been running experiments internally in there. I mean, I'm not at a point where I could say, yes, this is a super clear win, but we are looking at it to see what we could do to help customers in there. So yeah,
Fantastic.
Be an interesting year.
Yeah, 100%. So the website is raygun.com. You guys have a pretty good Twitter account, I would recommend. I know that we've gone back and forth between Octopus and Raygun with some jokes. It's always fun to have a little bit of tech fun. So anything else that you want to point people to other than the website and any other resources?
No, the website has pretty much everything there. Like I say, it's a pretty quick to start, run a free trial for a couple of weeks, see what's coming out. It doesn't take long to get things in there. We are a self-service organization, so you can come through and just get started. If you do need assistance, though, we do have some folks that can help there. Some companies always have to jump through procurement or legal or whatnot, so we have folks there for that as well.
Awesome.
But yeah, check it out. Ping us on Twitter. I'm TrustJD on Twitter as well. I'm quite, for my sins, quite active on Twitter. So yeah.
Appreciate it. That's awesome. Well, thanks, JD. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for talking to me about Raygun. It sounds awesome, and I can't wait to see what you guys are up to next.
Same with seeing where Octopus goes.